Hello, everyone. This is Dave Warner with Small Town Life. And this afternoon, I've got two guests on here. I've got Dr. Carol Thomas Reinson, and I have James Ebetino, Esquire. And they wrote this really interesting report about Little Falls and an experiment here in the school system 50 years ago. So I wanted to hear about it. And so both of you, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, Carol, yes, what you got, Carol?
Well, I just wanted to make sure to say thank you to all the participants. And we had over 20 individuals share their personal stories with us. And Dr. Julie Scarano, the Director of Alumni Communications, she really helped us gain access to folks. And a colleague of mine, Dr. Marlene Morgan, who is an expert on the Delphi qualitative method. I picked her brain during our study. And so I just want to let people know how much I appreciate it. The hardest thing when you do any study is getting participants. And
Yeah, that's true.
So that was really important to us.
Okay. Well, I want to, Carol, give me a little bit of your background. Like you're from Little Falls, and so talk to me a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was born and raised in Little Falls, went to Church Street School, and then attended junior high and part of high school at the Benton Hall building. I was definitely a typical teenager. I worked at Papalio's and I worked in the pool hall. And when I was in high school, I was involved. I volunteered to be part of the open school workshop that was at Trepus Manor. And they said our names were pulled out of a hat. I'm not sure if that's true or not. But there were about, I think, 8 to 10 students. And that was really an exciting time. And I have a lot of memories from that weekend. And after high school, during my senior year, I took probably the least amount of courses that I needed to take. I didn't get a Regents diploma. I traveled and worked to earn money. Lived on the road for 2 months, going up the Adirondack Trail to Nova Scotia. I also traveled to India and Kashmir. And then I came home and decided I wanted to go to college. I got married at that time and went to Herkimer County Community College. I didn't have any records at that time because the school had burned down. From Herkimer, I went to Utica College for occupational therapy. And then as an occupational therapist, I worked in Dolgeville and Little Falls. I worked at United Cerebral Palsy. I worked in the Valley School Districts for about 5 years. And Clete McLaughlin was the business manager and Jeff Davis was the superintendent. And they were wonderful because really occupational therapy was very new to the school districts. And then I got my master's at SUNY New Paltz and fell in love with research. My father was ill at the time, living in Syracuse, and I got a full scholarship because I, through I had been a straight A student all through college. And so I decided to do a PhD at Syracuse University and commuted, back and forth. Um, I decided to go to the University of Scranton. It's a Jesuit university, and I fell in love with it. And their values were the same kind of values that I had, with as far as social justice. I Since I had been a teenager, I had recognized that I loved to work with children with disabilities, and I was a pretty gifted therapist when it came to that. So then I was at the university for 20 years, and worked on curriculum, designing courses, designing a master's program, doing accreditation, reviews, and that's about my bio.
Okay, Jim, how about you? A little bit about your background.
Well, I came to Little Falls High School in 8th grade. Had been in a number of different schools. My parents were educators, and as they moved up through the ranks, from teacher to assistant principal, and then my father ended up being superintendent of Little Falls High School at this time that we're talking about. I was in the class of 72, but I graduated a year early. I was probably the opposite of Carol in that I doubled up on courses as opposed to slacked off, and I actually didn't know I was able to graduate until about 2/3 of the way through my junior year. I realized it and just decided, fine, I won't be a senior here. And I went off to Siena College that year, got my bachelor's degree there in political science, had a minor in Spanish. Then I didn't know what to do. I had a political science degree. I was very interested in politics. I still am. But I didn't plan to run for a government office. And so I didn't know what to do. So because my family was all in education, I ended up applying to Teachers College at Columbia University and got my master's there in education. I specialized in reading disabilities. And then after that, I became a teacher at the Cadman School in New York City, which is a Montessori school. And I, along with 3 other teachers, taught 2 classrooms of a total of about 50 kids, and the kids were K-3. At that point in time, I introduced a interesting curriculum that I wrote, which was based on you start education with the beginning of time, and you introduce different things as it occurs in time. So we had a big timeline around the 2 rooms that showed the Big Bang Theory, and when we brought in microscopes to look at cells and things like that, and talked about and had participation about those things. The key thing that was important to me was allowing the kids to go at their own speed. And so we had kids that in 3rd grade that were probably doing fifth grade work at the time, and we had kids in 3rd grades that were doing 2nd grade work because but everybody was working and progressing. I actually only did that for a year. Was out having a drink at night on a Friday night and heard that the law school entrance exam was being given the next day. And I went in cold with my $35 to take the test, and did well enough to get into law school. So I ended up going to St. John's Law School, and at St. John's, I became a member of the Law Review and was the research editor. So again, Some of these things you will notice have a lot to do with what we did here. But again, it was related to education. I learned a lot about writing style and those types of things also. After St. John's University, I went to work for IBM. I worked there for over 35 years in the legal department. I ended up retiring as the associate general counsel of IBM. And since then, I've been living in Georgia, retired and relaxing mostly.
Mostly, right? Well,
Right.
Jim, it's 50 years later. I'll start with you. Why did you decide now to write this report?
I'll turn this over quickly to Carol, but basically Carol was the initial contact. She came to me and said, "Are you interested in this?" And the answer was I jumped at the opportunity for a number of reasons. But I wanted Carol to start because she did put the whole thing together, and I was just coming in to assist.
Okay, Carol.
Well, I love Little Falls, and I keep up with everybody, having always come home during the canal days. My inspiration really was from the Little Falls Historical Society. I just love stories. People who know me know I love to tell stories, but I think the whole idea. I know Jeff Gressler and John Frazier and Ray Lenarsic and Mike Wallow. I was reading their stories about Vietnam and rock and roll and the pool hall and Don Staffos from the South Side. And I thought to myself, well, I can do that. And I had learned a lesson very early on, from Tony DeLuca, in that you give back to the community that raised you. So I went through, looking at topics, and looking for the open school, and there was nothing there. And they have extensive list of topics. Um, so, I remember what little was written on it was very negative. And I remember at the time, especially after the fire, you figure the open school lasted about 5.5 years. So, maybe 500 students that went through the program. I never did an actual count. But it was very taboo subject in Little Falls. And so I thought of Jim, and we had, both of us were fun-loving teenagers. I knew Jim was very bright and had a good sense of humor. I also figured, that he probably was privy to conversations around the dinner table that I might not, understand. So, and he did. I emailed him. We had reconnected via social media, and he said, sure, and he was right on board immediately. So, and it did unfold very nicely. I have to say, it was it was a pleasure not only to work with Jim, but it was a pleasure to do the study. And we've gotten good feedback and thank yous that this history didn't get lost. We were about the last folks, now that it's been 50 years, who will have went through the experience. And Jim and I were together when we decided, to give the students a voice. they're the ones. And for them to self-assess, the pros and cons. Um,
Right.
So from go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Jim.
I was going to say, so from there, yes, I spent my whole life, because my parents were in education, at the dinner table, hearing education philosophy, I'll call it, and always had an interest in it as a result. I also attended Trinkus Manor, which was where we had the weekend retreat to really develop the key principles behind the new school, the open school experience. In school, I was extremely. I was one of the many students, or a number of students, who was extremely good at taking advantage of the opportunities that were available to us. And as I said earlier, I graduated a year early, just at the last moment, because I was taking so many courses that I had everything that I needed. When I left there and went to Siena College, I was 16 years old when I walked in the door. I ran for student senator on the theory that I was going to help reduce the amount of number of core curriculum topics that were required, which was really just a carryover from my experience of having so many electives available when I was in high school. I met limited success. We were able to reduce the core curriculum by a couple of courses. I particularly wanted to get rid of the philosophy, which I ended up loving, but I didn't think it necessarily should be a core curriculum, and I was unable to do that. I also they had religion as core curriculums, which, of course, being a Franciscan school, I was not likely to succeed at getting that removed. But we did reduce the number a little bit. I basically, when I was asked to participate, or to help this project, wanted to see how other people felt about it, because I didn't really keep contact with that many people like Carol did, so I didn't really have a feel other than my success with it. I mean, I have a few friends, and they all did fine, but I didn't really know what the ultimate result was. And I agreed immediately with Carol that the key people to determine whether it's a success or not are the people who went through it, and how they view it looking back on it after maturing and understanding the impact of the various things. Also, I will say that because my father was superintendent during the time, I wanted to share with him the results of it, because he moved on and went through a number of traditional superintendent jobs after that. But this was always there was always a sparkle in his eye when there was a discussion about the open school, because he felt it was very successful at the time. So it was good.
And how would you characterize the difference between this open school concept, which we really haven't, explained what that is, versus the traditional model? What is the difference between the two?
Well, there were a number of things. Do you want to go, Carol?
Well, the flexibility, when you think of it developmentally, like when I don't mean that I slacked off, because I always gave 100%, but the courses I chose were creative writing, psychology, multimedia, foreign cooking. I took the things that interested me. I also, the relationships that we had with our teachers, mentoring was very formalized, And I didn't realize this until Jim had pointed it out to me, that they were very purposeful to make sure that not just the kids that were going to college had a good education, but that other kids, that they were stimulating curiosity. It was very common for teachers to give us books to read outside of class. And it's interesting because the research does show, especially in college, the more you interact with your professors outside of class, the higher your GPA is and the more successful you are. So, it was a loving community. There was a lot of warmth, but the relationships and the mentoring were huge. And many students talk. I mean, 50% of our courses we chose as electives. And that's pretty different now. There's not, much wiggle room. Students are kind of predetermined what it is they have to take in high school.
And I would add to that structurally it's different because we had 20-minute mods instead of 8 periods, and teachers were asked to, and a lot of this I know because of being at the dinner table, but teachers were asked to decide, did they need to have 1 period a day a week of what used to be, I think, 40 minutes or something like that, 30 or 40 minutes, or would they, I guess 40 minutes, or could they do it in 20-minute periods every day? Or in the case of shop and home economics, should they have it at 40 minutes because you have the prep time and the put away time on top of the class time? So going in for a shorter period doesn't really, you just get started cooking and you got to put it away. Let's put it that way. So the teachers could choose the module length and have a 20-minute class 3 times a week, or a 60-minute class twice a week, or whatever made sense for the particular class. The other thing is, because the classes were with a 40-minute class, it takes about 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of class to move from one class to the other, because you have to shuffle through the hallways. Everybody talks a little bit, gets seated, teacher takes attendance. By the time that's done and they start the class, they've already lost 10 minutes of time. In the open school, there was no 5-minute bell that you had to get from one class to the other. The classes just broke, and you went to your next class, and it was much more fluid of an environment, as opposed to having a complete change of classes all at one time. So it was more efficient. Those things, as well as the mentoring, and the other thing is that all of the teachers were asked, and not all of them did so well. The younger teachers did a lot more than the older teachers, who were more stayed in their ways at that point. But they were all asked to teach topics, electives, that they were passionate about, that they either themselves wanted to learn about along with the kids, or had knowledge about. And so there was an awful lot of classes that had discussions about current events in one form or the other, in the form of what's happening at Kent State at the time, and the Vietnam War and those types of things. And there were, but some would be, there'd be discussions about current thinking in psychology classes, in social studies classes, in a bunch of different classes, because the teachers, most of the teachers, were, within 10 or 15 years of our age, and they were experiencing the same dynamics in society at the time. And I think it helped all of us adjust to what was going on in a healthy way, because we could have discussions back and forth.
Morning
Awesome.
forum
Well,
too. I was just going to
the
talk
morning
a
forum
minute
where
about.
everybody got together.
Yeah, that was powerful. And we had a voice. Students had a lot of power. I know that kind of was threatening at times. And the community seemed to focus on behavior. But Morning Forum was a place where we, as a whole school, discussed issues. And it was such a great experience for all of us.
The forum was in the auditorium with all of the classes there, side by side, and there were times, and I think one of them was the killings at Kent State University, where the discussion went on through the first couple of modules of school into the school day, and it wasn't cut off by anybody. That people, the quality of the administrators and the teachers to know that was more important at that time to the mental health of kids than go into their next geometry class for 30 minutes.
Right. Well, I want to go to a quick commercial break here, and then when we come back, I want to talk about the environment, the controversy, the fire, and a little bit of that. Just when we come back, we'll be right back.
Visit My Little Falls and stay connected with the latest news, information, and events in the city and the area. Our mission is to generate interest in the community and connect residents in a more meaningful way by facilitating deeper conversations about how these stories will shape the future of the Mohawk Valley. Join thousands of weekly visitors who stay up to date with feature stories, interviews, videos, our event calendar, and print publication, the Mohawk Valley Express. It's about timely local news for the community, keeping citizens informed about important issues, telling about the people who live and work here, and giving locally owned businesses the opportunity to reach a very targeted audience of locals and tourists alike. It's a whole new form of media-rich content developed specifically for today's mobile lifestyle and listeners. You can download our iOS app in the iTunes Store, listen to our country music streaming radio station, or sign up for a weekly newsletter. Stop by today at mylittlefalls.com. You'll be glad you did.
Okay, we're back from commercial break here, and I'm with Dr. Carol Thomas Reinson and James M. Ebetino, Esquire. And we're talking about the Little Falls Open School Experience, a 50-year retrospective paper that they did on this. And so I wanted to follow up, and you've mentioned a little bit about it was controversial at the time. And in the paper you talk about that parents had one view of it, students maybe had a different view, and that then there was a fire, which was suspicious at least a little bit, right? So Carol, kind of you start out and tell me about that.
Well, 5.5 years into the program, Mr. Ebetino, the superintendent, left when I graduated the summer of '73. And I think his principal of the high school, Mr. Hike, I think had left a little before that. And, certainly their vision was being reduced and chipped away. And I know after I left, they wanted to do away with the morning forum. and the students held, a huge protest that went nowhere. I remember my senior year, and this is some information that's not in the article, but I had taken a lot of the information, the most potent quotes from the weekend at the Trinkus Manor, and I had made like a newspaper poster and anonymously posted it all over the school. This is slipping out of our fingers, don't let this happen. But after the fire, it was done. You know what I mean? There always was rumors, as sort of, people closed the books on it. I'm not sure, how it got investigated. But it certainly was, I think my frustration, because I was still living in Little Falls at the time, attending Herkimer County. And, it's like, well, they didn't try some other strategies. If students were complaining about the noise, why couldn't they set up one area that was quiet for those who needed a study hall? They just, a lot of politics was going on, rumors, and financially the school, took a huge hit. There was a lot of political problems with incoming superintendents. And really, when we look at the business manager, Mr. Cletus McLaughlin, really saved the education system financially in Little Falls. And we were lucky that, the ship was turned around. But I remember the communication between the teachers and administrators and the community members and the Board of Education. There was just nothing but fighting. And that's all the newspapers reflected, was all the controversy. And I don't even think the community members ever heard all the good things that were going on at the school.
Yeah, well, good news doesn't typically sell, right?
No,
That's correct.
Yeah.
It's
That's
sort of
unfortunate.
like
James, what was
a
your
parallel, with today's politics. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes, like you said, the drama and the controversy is what people feed on,
So
rather
Right.
than the solutions.
So I was
Right.
privy to dinner conversations about the disputes between the board and the administration, because my father personally experienced those. The impression that I had at the time was that probably, and I'm making up a number, but probably 85 to 90% of the teachers were extremely positive about the environment. The environment was more like a college campus. Kids did flow. They didn't go to study halls. They often would go sit in on other classes. Go if they were in home ec, they'd go work on or woodworking. They'd go work on their project there. Some would play chess in their free time. There was a lot of not a lot, but there was a reasonable amount of groups sitting on the stairwell talking about school or talking about important things, not just making jokes and laughing and causing problems. in terms of the noise, for anyone that had a particular sensitivity to being disturbed, it was a problem. To me and most people I know, it wasn't a problem. Yes, once in a while somebody would go by the open school class that you were in and wave hello, but that's not to me and to most of the people that I knew, that's not a major distraction from what's going on. But the 10% or 15% of the teachers who were not adapting to the change helped spur people in the community construing those things that were comfortable but not out of control as being out of control, because they expected a rigid environment or a more rigid environment, and because it wasn't rigid, they were uncomfortable. Some of them did not like the idea that they were asked to mentor students. The superintendent, my father, asked each teacher to find at least one student where they had some similarity with or some bond with to mentor in whatever direction, and not just the smart kids and not just the less smart kids, but everybody. Just find somebody and do that. And teachers from prior generations and more structured environment found that to be extra work and not really what they were there for. There's no fault in either those teachers or the community thinking that that it was too soft on kids or something like that, because they grew up and they were successful in having gone to a school that was more rigid. So why experiment with my kids in my community when I know I went to school in a rigid environment and I did fine? I personally think that for me and for most of the people in the survey, the negatives were not even mentioned. We asked for negatives, and all but about 5 students said that they didn't have any negative feelings about the school, and it didn't negatively affect them in any way. So, but 5 students did, and as Carol said, if the school had gone on and if it wasn't such a and it was mostly, I'll call it political, but it was education philosophy political. If there wasn't such a political battle going on, what would have happened is it would have matured. I think they would have found ways to solve the needs of the kids that needed a more structured environment without taking it away from the 90% of the kids that didn't need that structure, right, and were actually becoming growing more quickly into adulthood because they're making their own decisions on which classes to select and those types of things. So it was unfortunate.
I want you to kind of jump 50 years forward and kind of look at the educational system today, and how do you think that model would fit in today's society? I'll start with you, Jim, because you were talking, and then I'll go to Carol.
Well, to tell you the truth, I have not followed the educational system. My expectation is that it's more traditional, and it may be a little more flexible than the traditional was 50 years ago. But I don't think that schools, the amount of work on teachers and administrators and guidance counselors and everybody to deal with an environment where kids can select 50% of their electives and teachers have to teach and mentor as well as do their regular courses, I don't think is a common thing. I believe that and I think you'll probably get to this at some point as to where do we go with this. I believe that what I would like to see is the people who are developing curriculums today in various environments look at what our study was and what we discerned from the students as to what was important to them, where they felt that they grew, what the attributes were of the system that helped them the most, and find the ones that work and use those, confirm the ones that are in that have been taken on in as it's gone forward in time, that they are working, and start looking to find how to fix what I think were minor difficulties and problems with the experience that was going on.
I can
Yeah.
speak
Carol's
a
chomping
little
at the
bit.
bit, Jim.
Yeah, I am, because I've had 1,000.
I can see her. She's getting all fidgety on me there.
students, I know. I've had about 1,000 college students in my career, and have developed curriculum. And when I did the lit review, when I was and I was feeding Jim some articles before we, jumped into it. I was looking at what's out there, what some people think of the open schools as a fad in the 70s. Is a lot of threads, things that the open school did are now part of learning theory and educational practices, at least in the field of occupational therapy and special education. We have multiple intelligences. Not everybody is a math and language whiz. You have the whole circle of all the different sensory systems. You have cooperative learning, which I studied in Italy for a month when I was at Syracuse. You have problem-based learning, very similar to the STEM, the things that the grade school in Little Falls is doing right now. I mean, how exciting
That's an awesome
it would
STEM
be.
program.
Oh my gosh, I would love to talk to those folks. Internships and experiential learning. I know my niece, who just graduated, did an internship in the kindergarten at Benton Hall this year. Concept mapping, mentoring, student directed research. I mean, when I went to Syracuse and they told me that they were student directed research for my PhD, I was like, wow, this is wonderful, So some of the elements that we kind of took the whole ball of wax all at once, but you've seen a lot of these different threads filter down. And curriculum is so exciting to me. And I think, change is funny. You have your leapers and your creepers, and they're early adopters. Jim and I are early adopters, okay? Someone gives us an idea and it sounds really interesting, great potential, we're going to give it a try. You know what? If it doesn't work, we'll tweak it, we'll learn from it. But then you have the creepers, the people who just kind of wait and see. They want to see it work before they get involved in it. And then you have the small minority that aren't going to change anyways, So
Right.
change is hard for people. And in our culture, what was going on in the 60s and early 70s, I think you have that same paradigm shift now with artificial intelligence. Are students going to need to know the facts. And no, they're going to need to know how to solve problems, how to think,
Right.
not what to think. So, you can tell I just get excited by curriculum. And
I can
those
tell.
of us, I know, those of us who had the open school, we just consider it a blessing. There's like I said, a few hundred of us who really did have a great experience. And, but
Well, yeah, Carol,
yeah,
you've done the study. Now
yeah.
what? What do you think is going to happen
Well,
now that it's public? What do you want to happen?
we need to get a summary out, and we probably would need to get it published in an academic journal. And because it is, 45 pages long. So, it is a
Yes.
very comprehensive. Um, I would like to see a little brochure. I think there are, I know funding and, getting that together. But I think the people who went through the open experience, I think they pay a couple bucks for, a copy of it. Um, I'd like to, I don't want
That'd
people
only get
to
you like
think it was a
$1,000 by the time
failure.
you're done.
Is it? See, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I did the math real
But
quick,
that's
Carol.
something.
500 times 2, it came up real fast.
Okay.
Might be more than a couple bucks.
You could tell I'm not a business person. And Jim is.
I saw
and I
Jim.
were
He
so
started to frown
well-suited
right
for
away.
this study.
The legal mind went crazy on me there.
Yeah, right. Jim and I were so well suited as writing partners because
Yeah.
we complemented each other so well. But I'd like to see it have a life. I don't want it just to be a one and nothing kind of thing. And I
Right.
think there's a lot to learn from it. And it's part of Little Falls' story, and I think it should be out there.
Yeah.
I like the part, like the fact that it's part of Little Falls' story. I would like to figure out how, and we are trying, figure out how we can get people to read it who are in the process now of thinking about what education should be in the future. And that's people within Little Falls, people within New York State, people in the federal government, wherever it is. That's to just get them to read it and to try to pull out of it points that they think should be broadened in use in education. And so departments of education, those types of things, but finding the contacts and finding how to get to them and where they are and who they are is difficult. But that would, at least in my view, create a bigger opportunity for what we learn to get spread and to carry on into the future. And that's not to say that everything that appears as a positive to the kids that to the adults now, but the kids at the time that responded to us are things that ought to be put into the
Right.
curriculums. But some of it should, and somebody ought
Well, I
to
have
figure out how to look at it and do that.
I have an idea. So
Good.
Dr. Keith Ebetino is the superintendent of schools right now, and Leanne Dooley is the principal over at the high school. And I actually think that if we got them involved in a discussion, bring you both back for a second show, they could give kind of the current state, and we could talk about this in maybe a broader forum, even to the point of, we could do some call-ins or something like that. Maybe some of the other students get them involved who went through the program and talk about it and maybe see, because I know they're very open. I mean, that's why they have that incredible STEAM program at Benton Hall. It is a model for the country, what they're doing over there. And it's not to say that they couldn't take pieces of this and have a new model or modify the model that they have. I know it's very structured these days from the state, very top down, but that doesn't mean that locally you can implement some interesting things.
Well, that would be great.
Well, I'll make that happen.
I would definitely be interested. Yep.
Okay. All right. We'll do that. Well, I appreciate. Yeah, I appreciate both of you being here today. It was fun. I didn't realize we'd have a follow-up show, but we're going to set one up and and do that. But I'm glad you were both on here today.
All right. Well, thank you for having us.
You're welcome.